The old wooden fence creaked in the wind as Jake Harrison walked the perimeter of his ranch for the third time that evening. At 40 years old, his weathered hands gripped the flashlight with the same steady strength that had guided him through 2 decades of solitary ranching life. The Montana sky hung heavy with storm clouds, and the air carried that electric smell that promised trouble. Jake had always been a man of few words. Even as a child, while other kids chattered endlessly about their dreams and fears, Jake preferred the company of silence. His parents used to joke that he spoke more to the cattle than to people, and they weren't wrong. Animals didn't judge. They didn't ask uncomfortable questions about why a good-looking man like him never married, never settled down with a family. The ranch had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather built the main house with his own hands back in 1952, and his father had expanded it, adding the modern kitchen and extra bedrooms that now sat empty most of the time. Jake lived alone in that big house, with only his border collie, Rex, for company. The dog had passed away 2 winters ago, and Jake hadn't found the heart to get another one. Thunder rumbled in the distance, still miles away but getting closer. Jake quickened his pace as he checked the barn doors and made sure the horses were secure in their stalls. His 2 quarter horses, Dusty and Belle, were restless, sensing the approaching storm. He spoke to them in his quiet way, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy there, girl," he said to Belle as she tossed her head nervously. "Just a little thunder." "You've been through worse." Jake had been through worse, too. He'd weathered financial difficulties when beef prices dropped, survived the harsh winter of 2019 when he lost half his cattle, and endured the loneliness that seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. At 40, he'd accepted that he was meant to be alone. Women in town were either already married, too young, or seemed intimidated by his quiet nature. The local matchmakers, mostly well-meaning older ladies from church, had tried to set him up over the years. There was Sarah, the teacher who talked too much about her students. Then came Monica, the bank teller who spent more time on her phone than listening to conversation. And who could forget Patricia, the real estate agent who kept suggesting he sell the ranch and move to town. None of them understood that the ranch wasn't just his home. It was his soul. Every morning when he stepped onto the front porch with his coffee and watched the sun rise over the pastures, he felt a connection to something bigger than himself. The rhythm of ranch life, the changing seasons, the simple satisfaction of hard work, these things filled most of the empty spaces in his heart. But not all of them. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Jake secured the last gate. He pulled his worn cowboy hat lower and jogged toward the house, but something made him stop halfway across the yard. A sound that didn't belong to the storm caught his attention. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it sounded like crying. Jake stood perfectly still, listening. The rain was falling harder now, pattering against his jacket and the metal roof of the barn. There it was again, definitely crying, and it was coming from the direction of the old barn. The old barn sat about 50 yards from the main barn, closer to the dirt road that wound through his property. Jake rarely used it anymore except for storage. It housed old farming equipment, hay bales from last season, and memories he preferred not to disturb too often. His father's old tractor sat in there, covered by a tarp, along with boxes of his mother's things that he'd never found the courage to sort through. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the landscape for a brief moment. In that split second of brightness, Jake saw something that made his heart skip. The side door of the old barn was slightly open, and he could swear he saw movement inside. His first thought was that someone might be stealing equipment. It wouldn't be the first time. 2 years ago, he'd caught teenagers trying to make off with tools from his workshop, but thieves didn't usually cry, and they certainly didn't stay around during thunderstorms. Jake approached the barn slowly, his boots squelching in the muddy ground. The crying was clearer now, definitely coming from inside. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded frightened or hurt. His protective instincts kicked in, overriding his natural caution around strangers. "Hello?" he called out, stopping just outside the door. "Is someone in there?" The crying stopped immediately. Jake could hear movement inside, shuffling sounds like someone trying to hide. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the rain. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" For a long moment there was only silence except for the storm. Then a voice answered, soft, shaky, clearly female. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here. I just needed somewhere to wait out the storm." Jake pushed the door open a little wider and stepped inside, shaking the rain off his hat. The barn was dark except for the faint light from his flashlight, which he kept pointed toward the ground so as not to startle whoever was inside. "Where are you?" he asked gently. "Over here, by the hay bales." Jake turned his flashlight in that direction and saw her. A woman, probably in her mid-30s, sitting on a bale of hay with her arms wrapped around her knees. Her long brown hair was damp and tangled, and her clothes, a simple blue dress and cardigan, were muddy and torn in places. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes that reflected the flashlight beam. "Are you hurt?" Jake asked, taking a step closer but maintaining his distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. She shook her head quickly. "No, I'm not hurt. Just scared and cold and—" Her voice trailed off and she looked down at her hands. Jake noticed she was shivering. The barn provided shelter from the rain, but it was chilly, and her damp clothes weren't helping. Without thinking too much about it, he shrugged off his heavy work jacket and held it out to her. "Here, take this. You're freezing." She looked up at him with surprise, as if she couldn't believe a stranger would show her kindness. Hesitantly, she reached out and took the jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders. It was too big for her, but it was warm and dry. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't even know me, and I'm trespassing on your property." "That doesn't matter right now," Jake said. "What matters is that you're safe and warm. I'm Jake Harrison. This is my ranch." "I'm Emma," she replied, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. "Emma Walsh." Jake nodded, filing away her name. "Well, Emma, you can't stay out here in this storm. The old barn leaks in heavy rain, and it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Why don't you come up to the house? I can make some coffee, get you dried off properly." Emma's eyes darted toward the door, and Jake could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. She was clearly afraid of something, but she was also cold and miserable. "I don't want to impose," she said finally. "I can wait here until the storm passes." "Nonsense," Jake replied, surprising himself with his firmness. He was usually much more hesitant around people, especially strangers. But something about Emma's vulnerability brought out his protective side. "You'll catch pneumonia in here. Come on, it's just up to the house. You can warm up, dry off, and wait out the storm properly." Lightning crashed overhead, followed immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. Emma jumped, and Jake saw her decision made in that moment of fear. "Okay," she said, standing up slowly. "Thank you. I really appreciate your kindness." Jake led the way out of the barn, holding the door open for Emma. The storm had intensified while they were talking, and the rain was now coming down in sheets. They ran across the muddy yard, Jake matching his longer stride to her pace, and burst through the front door of the house just as another lightning bolt lit up the sky. Inside, Jake's house was exactly what Emma might have expected from a bachelor rancher. It was clean but sparse, with practical furniture and minimal decoration. The living room contained a comfortable-looking couch, a large television that looked like it rarely got used, and bookshelves filled with farming manuals and classic novels. The walls were painted a neutral beige, and the only personal touches were a few family photographs on the mantelpiece and a Native American blanket draped over the back of the couch. "Bathroom's just down that hall if you want to clean up," Jake said, pointing toward a doorway. "I'll put some coffee on and see if I can find you some dry clothes." Emma nodded gratefully and headed toward the bathroom. Jake watched her go, noting how small she seemed in his large jacket, how carefully she moved as if she might bolt at any moment. There was definitely more to Emma's story than just seeking shelter from a storm. While she was in the bathroom, Jake moved efficiently around his kitchen. He started a pot of coffee, pulled out some leftover stew from the refrigerator to heat up, and rummaged through his closet to find something she could wear. He settled on his smallest flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants with a drawstring waist. When Emma emerged from the bathroom, she looked better but still fragile. She'd combed her hair and washed her face, but Jake could see exhaustion in her eyes. "Here," he said, handing her the clothes. "These will be too big, but they're warm and dry. You can change in the guest room, first door on the left." Emma took the clothes and disappeared again. Jake used the time to set out mugs for coffee and bowls for the stew. He wasn't used to having company, especially not a mysterious woman who'd been hiding in his barn, but he found himself wanting to take care of her. When she returned, wearing his clothes that indeed swamped her small frame, Jake had to smile slightly. She'd rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, and the flannel shirt hung almost to her knees. "Better?" he asked. "Much better. Thank you." Emma sat down at his kitchen table, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. She wrapped her hands around it, seeming to absorb the warmth. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the storm rage outside. Jake had never been one for small talk, and Emma seemed lost in her own thoughts. Finally, Jake spoke. "You don't have to tell me your story if you don't want to," he said quietly. "But if you're in some kind of trouble, maybe I can help." Emma looked up at him, and he saw her eyes fill with tears. "I don't know where to start," she whispered. "Start wherever feels right," Jake replied. "I've got nowhere else to be, and this storm's going to last a while." Outside, thunder rolled across the Montana sky, and inside the warm kitchen, two lonely people sat across from each other, both sensing that this night might change everything. Emma stared into her coffee mug for a long time, as if the dark liquid might give her the courage to speak. Jake waited patiently, something he'd learned from years of working with skittish animals. Sometimes the best thing you could do was simply be present and let them come to you in their own time. Finally, Emma took a shaky breath and began to talk. "I was married," she said quietly, "for 8 years, to a man named David Walsh. At first, everything seemed perfect. He was charming, successful, and he made me feel special. But after the wedding, things changed." Jake's hands tightened slightly around his coffee mug, but he didn't interrupt. "David was controlling," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "He didn't want me to work, said he could provide for both of us. He chose my clothes, my friends, even what I could eat. If I disagreed with him about anything, he would get angry. Really angry." The storm outside seemed to mirror the turbulence in Emma's voice. Lightning flashed through the kitchen windows, casting brief shadows across her face. "For years I told myself it wasn't that bad. He never hit me, not really. Just grabbed my arm too hard sometimes or pushed me when he was frustrated. I made excuses for him. I thought if I could just be a better wife, if I could make him happy, things would get better." Jake felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same protective fury he felt when he found injured animals on his property. But he kept his expression neutral, sensing that Emma needed to tell her story without interruption. "Last month, something changed," Emma said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "David lost a big account at work, and his drinking got worse. He started talking about having children, but not in a happy way. He said he needed an heir, someone to carry on his name. When I told him I wasn't ready, that I wanted us to work on our marriage first, She paused, touching her throat unconsciously. He hurt you, Jake said quietly. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded, tears spilling over. That night, for the first time, I was truly afraid for my life. While he was passed out drunk, I packed a small bag and left. I didn't have much money, he controlled all our accounts, but I had to get out. Where were you trying to go? Jake asked gently. My sister lives in Billings. I haven't seen her in 3 years because David didn't approve of her, but I hoped she might help me. I was driving through the night trying to get there, when my car broke down about 2 miles from here. Jake understood now. So you walked to find shelter and saw the barn. I was so scared, Emma admitted. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see David's car coming after me. When I saw your barn, it seemed like a blessing. I just wanted somewhere safe to hide until morning. You did the right thing leaving, Jake said firmly. No one should have to live like that. Emma looked up at him with surprise. You believe me? Just like that? Why would you lie about something like that? Jake replied. Besides, I can see the truth in your eyes. You've been through hell. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Emma's story settling between them. Jake found himself studying her face in the soft kitchen light, noticing details he'd missed before. There was strength there. Beneath the fear and exhaustion, this woman had lived through years of abuse and still found the courage to escape. What's your plan now? Jake asked. Do you still want to go to your sister's? Emma's face crumpled. I called her from a payphone yesterday. David had already contacted her, told her some story about me having a breakdown. He can be very convincing when he wants to be. She told me I should go home to my husband and work things out. She didn't believe you? David always made sure to be charming around my family. They think he's wonderful. My own sister told me I was being dramatic and that I should be grateful to have such a devoted husband. Emma's voice was bitter now. I don't have anywhere else to go. Jake felt something shift inside his chest, like a door opening that had been locked for years. Here was this brave, broken woman who needed help, and he had the means to provide it. More than that, he wanted to provide it. You can stay here, he said without thinking. Emma's eyes widened. Jake, I can't. You don't even know me. I know enough, Jake replied, surprising himself with his certainty. I know you're brave enough to leave a dangerous situation. I know you're polite enough to apologize for trespassing when you were just trying to survive. And I know you need help. But your neighbors will talk. A strange woman living with the bachelor rancher? It'll cause gossip. Jake actually smiled at that. Emma, my nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and they mind their own business. As for gossip, let people talk. I've been the subject of local speculation for years anyway. Emma was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with the decision. Jake could see the internal battle, her desperate need for safety warring with her reluctance to impose on a stranger. I could help around the ranch, she said finally. Earn my keep. I'm a hard worker, and I learn quickly. You don't need to earn anything, Jake said. But if it would make you feel better to help out, I won't say no. This place is too big for one person anyway. And it was true. Jake had been maintaining the ranch alone for so long that he'd forgotten how much easier things could be with an extra pair of hands. More than that, he'd forgotten how good it felt to have another person around, someone to cook for, someone to talk to at the end of a long day. Over the next few days, as the storm passed and clear weather returned, Jake and Emma fell into an easy routine. Emma proved to be exactly what she'd claimed, a hard worker who learned quickly. She helped with feeding the horses, collecting eggs from the chickens, and maintaining the vegetable garden that Jake had let go somewhat wild in recent years. But it was the small domestic moments that affected Jake the most. coming in from morning chores to find coffee already made and the smell of bacon filling the kitchen, having someone to share meals with, to discuss the weather and the day's plans. Hearing feminine laughter echo through the house for the first time in decades. Emma, meanwhile, seemed to blossom in the safe environment of the ranch. The fearful, hunted look gradually faded from her eyes, replaced by something that looked like peace. She spent hours in the garden, coaxing flowers and vegetables back to life with a patience and gentleness that Jake found mesmerizing. "You have a gift with growing things," he told her one evening as they sat on the front porch, watching the sun set over the pastures. "My grandmother taught me," Emma replied, a soft smile crossing her face. "She always said that plants respond to love and attention, just like people do." "Smart woman." "She was. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. I lived with her until I went to college." Emma's expression grew wistful. She would have seen right through David's act. She had good instincts about people. "What happened to her?" "Cancer, 5 years ago. David didn't want me to take time off work to care for her, said it would interfere with our social obligations. I did it anyway. But I always regretted not standing up to him sooner." Jake reached over and covered her hand with his. It was the first time he'd touched her since that first night when he'd helped her out of the barn, and he felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. "You were there for her when it mattered," he said quietly. "That's what counts." Emma didn't pull her hand away, and they sat like that as darkness fell around them, both aware that something significant was shifting between them. It was Jake who spoke first. "Emma, I need you to know something. Having you here, it's changed things for me. I've been alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to share a life with someone. I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way, but I need you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you want to stay. Not just as someone seeking shelter, but as someone I genuinely care about." Emma turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, Jake could see tears glistening in her eyes. "I care about you too," she whispered. "More than I thought possible after everything I've been through. You've shown me what kindness looks like, what respect feels like. I'd forgotten that men could be gentle." Jake lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, and Emma leaned into the touch. "You deserve gentleness," he said. "You deserve to be cherished, not controlled." They might have kissed then, but the moment was interrupted by the sound of a car engine approaching on the dirt road. Both of them froze, and Jake felt Emma's hand tighten in his. "It's probably just someone who took a wrong turn," Jake said. But even as the words left his mouth, he could see the fear returning to Emma's eyes. The car came closer, its headlights sweeping across the front of the house. It was a black sedan, expensive-looking, and it pulled to a stop in Jake's driveway with the confident precision of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Emma stood up so quickly that she nearly knocked over her chair. "He found me," she breathed, her face going white in the moonlight. "Oh, God, he found me." The car door slammed, and a man's voice called out across the yard, smooth and authoritative. Emma, darling, I know you're in there. It's time to come home." Jake rose from his chair, instinctively moving to place himself between Emma and the approaching figure. In the porch light, he could see the man clearly. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of polished good looks that came from money and privilege. This had to be David Walsh. "Jake," Emma whispered behind him, her voice shaking with terror. "Please don't let him take me back." Jake felt something fierce and protective surge through him. He'd spent his whole life avoiding confrontation, preferring the quiet safety of his solitary existence. But as he looked at this man who had terrorized the woman he was falling in love with, Jake Harrison discovered that there were some things worth fighting for. "Stay behind me," he told Emma quietly. Then, raising his voice to address the man in his driveway, Jake called out, You're on private property. I suggest you get back in your car and leave." David Walsh laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. "I don't think you understand the situation here, friend. That's my wife hiding behind you, and she's coming home with me whether she wants to or not." Jake stepped down from the porch, moving slowly but deliberately toward the other man. For the first time in his adult life, the quiet rancher was ready for a fight. The two men faced each other in the circle of light cast by the porch lamp, as different as night and day. David Walsh stood with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way, his expensive suit immaculate despite the long drive. Jake Harrison, in his work jeans and flannel shirt, might have looked like the underdog, but there was something in his stance that spoke of deep roots and unshakable determination. "Let me make this simple for you, cowboy," David said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a businessman used to closing deals. "Emma is my wife. She's been having some emotional problems lately, acting irrationally. I've come to take her home where she belongs." "The only problem Emma has," Jake replied quietly, "is a husband who doesn't know the difference between a wife and property." David's polished smile faltered slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about. Emma and I have been married for 8 years. We have a life together, a home, responsibilities. You're nothing but a stranger who's been taken in by a confused woman's lies." Behind Jake, Emma found her voice. It was shaky at first, but grew stronger as she spoke. "They're not lies, David, and I'm not confused. I'm clearer now than I've been in years." David's attention shifted to his wife, and Jake saw the man's expression change. The fake charm disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Emma, sweetheart, you're embarrassing yourself. And me. Now come along before this goes any further. We can discuss your little adventure when we get home." "No." Emma stepped out from behind Jake, and though she was still afraid, there was steel in her voice. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are," David said, his tone hardening. "You're my wife, and you'll do as I say. Now get in the car." "She said no," Jake interjected, moving slightly to maintain his position between them. "I suggest you listen to her." David turned his full attention back to Jake, and the mask of civility finally slipped completely. "Stay out of this, ranch hand. This is between me and my property." "There's your problem right there," Jake said, his own anger beginning to show. "She's not your property. She's a human being with the right to make her own choices." "Rights?" David laughed bitterly. "Let me tell you about rights. I have the right to my wife's obedience. I have the right to take back what belongs to me, and I have lawyers who will make sure those rights are respected." "Your lawyers aren't here right now," Jake observed calmly, "but the sheriff's department is just a phone call away." For the first time, David looked uncertain. "You wouldn't involve the police in a domestic matter." "Watch me," Jake said, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. "Wait." David held up a hand, his calculating mind clearly working. "Let's be reasonable here. Emma, you can't possibly want to stay on this primitive ranch in the middle of nowhere. You're used to the finer things in life, culture, society, comfort. What can this nobody offer you that I can't?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, and Jake felt his heart clench with the possibility that she might actually be reconsidering. Then she spoke, her voice clear and sure. "He offers me something you never did, David. He offers me respect, kindness, the freedom to be myself without fear. Those aren't primitive things. They're everything." David's face darkened with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He took a step toward Emma, his hand raised, but Jake moved faster than either of them expected. The quiet rancher caught David's wrist in a grip that made the other man yelp with pain. Jake's years of physical labor had given him a strength that David's gym workouts couldn't match. "I wouldn't," Jake said softly, but there was steel in his voice. "In fact, I think it's time for you to leave. Take your hands off me. David struggled against Jake's grip, but couldn't break free. I'll sue you for assault. I'll have you arrested. For defending a woman from attack? Jake replied calmly. I don't think so. Now you can walk back to your car like a civilized person, or I can help you get there. Your choice. David jerked his arm free and stepped back, his face flushed with humiliation and fury. This isn't over, Emma. You're still my wife legally. I'll be back with papers, with lawyers. I'll drag you through every court in the state if I have to. Then you'll do it without me, Emma said, and Jake heard something new in her voice, not just courage, but power. I'll be filing for divorce, David, and this time I won't be alone. I'll have witnesses to your behavior, people who will testify about what you really are. No one will believe you over me, David snarled. Maybe they would have believed you before, Emma replied, but not anymore. I'm not the frightened, isolated woman I was when I lived with you. I have friends now, people who care about me, people who see me for who I really am, not who you tried to make me. David looked between Emma and Jake, clearly realizing that the dynamic had shifted beyond his control. The woman who used to cower before him was standing tall, and the stranger he'd dismissed as a simple rancher had proven to be more formidable than expected. Fine, David said finally, straightening his tie with hands that shook slightly with rage. Have your little fantasy romance with the cowboy. But when reality sets in, when you remember what you're giving up, don't come crawling back to me. I won't, Emma said simply. David turned on his heel and stalked back to his car, but paused with his hand on the door handle. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, cowboy, he called to Jake. Emma's more trouble than she's worth. High maintenance, needy, unstable. Good luck with that. Jake waited until David's car had disappeared down the dirt road before turning to Emma. She was shaking, but not with fear, with adrenaline and something that looked like relief. Are you okay? He asked softly. Emma nodded, then shook her head, then laughed through her tears. I stood up to him. After all these years, I finally stood up to him. You did more than that, Jake said, pulling her into his arms. You were magnificent. They held each other in the Montana darkness, both trembling with the aftermath of confrontation and the weight of what had just changed between them. He'll be back, Emma said against Jake's chest. He meant what he said about lawyers and courts. Let him come, Jake replied firmly. We'll deal with it together. We? Emma pulled back to look at him. Jake cupped her face in his hands, looking down at her with an expression that took her breath away. Emma, I know this is all happening fast. I know you're just getting out of a terrible situation, and maybe it's too soon for me to say this, but I love you. I've been alone for 40 years, and in just 1 week, you've shown me what I've been missing. I don't want to go back to that loneliness. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears this time. I love you too, she whispered. I didn't think I could ever trust a man again, but you've shown me what real love looks like. It's not control or possession, it's freedom and partnership and respect. They kissed then, finally, under the vast Montana sky filled with stars. It was soft and sweet and full of promise. Over the next few months, David kept his word about making things difficult. There were lawyers and court appearances, attempts to freeze assets and claims of mental instability. But Emma had changed, and she faced each challenge with growing confidence. Jake stood by her side through all of it, never wavering in his support. The local community, which had initially been curious about the mysterious woman living at the Harrison Ranch, quickly embraced Emma once they saw how she'd transformed not just herself, but Jake as well. The quiet rancher smiled more, laughed more, and seemed to have found a piece that had been missing from his life for years. Emma threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She expanded the vegetable garden, started selling produce and flowers at the local farmers market, and even convinced Jake to add a few alpacas to their livestock. The shy woman who had hidden in his barn had blossomed into a confident partner in every sense of the word. On a warm spring evening, exactly 1 year after that first thunderstorm, Jake and Emma sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Emma's divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, and the legal battles were finally behind them. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, taking her hand in his. Emma smiled, looking out over the land that had become her home, at the man who had become her heart. "Only one," she said. Jake's eyebrows raised in concern. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to leave. I could have found you sooner." Jake brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "You found me exactly when you were supposed to. Everything happened just the way it needed to." Emma leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of the man who had saved her in more ways than she could count. "What do you think our neighbors would say if they knew that the silent rancher was planning to propose to the woman who hid in his barn?" Jake's hand stilled on hers. "How did you—" Emma laughed, pulling back to look at him. "Jake Harrison, you've been carrying that ring box in your pocket for 2 weeks. You're not as sneaky as you think you are." Jake's face flushed red and he fumbled in his pocket for the small velvet box. "I was waiting for the perfect moment." "This is the perfect moment," Emma said softly. "Right here, right now, in the place where we found each other." Jake slid off his chair and dropped to one knee on the porch where he'd first brought Emma inside from the storm. The ring was simple but beautiful, a single diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the last light of day. "Emma Walsh, soon to be Harrison," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me? Will you help me turn this house into a home filled with laughter and love?" "Yes," Emma said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes to all of it. To the ranch, to the life, to the love. To you. Always yes to you." As Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, thunder rumbled in the distance, not threatening this time, but like nature's own celebration. They kissed as the first drops of rain began to fall, and Emma couldn't help but laugh at the perfect symmetry of it all. "Think we should go inside?" Jake asked against her lips. "In a minute," Emma replied, wrapping her arms around the neck of the man who had shown her what real love looked like. "I want to stay out here just a little longer." They stood together on the porch, holding each other as the gentle rain fell around them. Two people who had found in each other everything they'd been searching for. The silent rancher was silent no more, and the woman who had once hidden in his barn would never have to hide again. In the distance, another rumble of thunder rolled across the Montana sky, but this time it sounded like a promise instead of a threat, a promise of storms weathered together, of quiet moments shared, of a love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning into something stronger than either of them had ever dared to hope for. As they finally went inside to begin the rest of their lives together, Emma paused in the doorway to look back at the old barn where it all began. Tomorrow, she thought, she might just suggest they convert it into something special, maybe a workshop for her crafts, or a place to store wedding decorations, or simply a reminder of the night when two lonely souls found each other in the middle of a storm. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the roof of the house that was finally, truly, a home. And inside, Jake and Emma Harrison-to-be began planning their future together, their voices mixing with the sound of the storm like a song of love and new beginnings.